I almost didn't go that day. The forecast was miserable, low gray sky pressing down like a wet ceiling, the kind of November morning that makes you rethink every decision you've ever made. My colleague Declan had already texted me twice asking if I wanted to cancel. "Mate, it's going to be bleak. Let's do next week." I told him I was already on the train. I don't know why, exactly. Something in me just needed the coast. I'd been living in London for 11 years by then, and there are days when the city starts to feel like a very expensive machine you're trapped inside. Noise and concrete and the same coffee queue every morning. So I'd booked a cheap hotel near Poole Harbour the week before, almost impulsively, the way you do when you're one commute away from losing your mind. Declan met me at the station anyway. That's the thing about Declan, he complains and, then, he shows up. We drove out along the coast road with the windows slightly fogged and the radio playing something neither of us was listening to. The sea was doing what the sea does in November, heaving itself around like it was annoyed at something. Waves that weren't quite dramatic enough for a postcard but were absolutely dramatic enough to soak you to the spine if you got too close. We stopped at a small cafe near the lifeboat station. The kind of place with mismatched mugs and a laminated menu and a woman behind the counter who'd clearly been there since before I was born. I had a tea that arrived so hot it was basically decorative for the first 10 minutes, and Declan had one of those enormous scones that require a genuine structural commitment. The RNLI station was just there, across the car park. Orange and gray. Solid looking. Quietly extraordinary in the way that truly extraordinary things often are. No fanfare, no crowd, just this building sitting at the edge of the water doing exactly what it promised to do. I'd passed stations like it 100 times over the years without really thinking about what happened inside them. That was about to change. A woman at the next table, mid-50s, walking boots, the look of someone who knew this coastline well, was talking to her husband in a low voice. I wasn't trying to listen. But the cafe was small and the rain had started to tap against the window and there wasn't much else to compete with. They said it'd be confirmed by noon, she was saying. Official visit. Her husband made a sound that wasn't quite a word. William and Kate, she said. Coming to the station. I looked at Declan. He was still constructing his scone. Did you hear that? I said. Did you actually hear that? He looked up. The royal thing? Yes, the royal thing. He considered this with the energy of a man who had already used his enthusiasm quota for the day on getting out of bed. Could be nothing. Could be one of those rumor things. But the woman was on her phone now, nodding, and across the car park 2 police vehicles had appeared that definitely hadn't been there when we'd pulled in. I left my tea to cool itself and went to the window. The lifeboat station crew were already outside. 4 of them, in their kit, and not doing anything performative, not standing at attention or arranging themselves for cameras. Just talking amongst themselves, checking equipment, existing in that particular way of people who have genuinely important jobs and don't need to announce it. One of them, young guy, couldn't have been more than 25, was coiling a rope with the focused concentration of someone who understood that the quality of that rope coil might one day matter in ways most people never have to consider. The station mechanic was wiping down the hull of the lifeboat itself. The boat was enormous up close. Blaze orange. Built for the specific violence of the water, all its angles functional, nothing decorative about it anywhere. I stepped outside. The rain had softened to that particular coastal mist that isn't quite wet enough to umbrella but absolutely wet enough to eventually ruin you. The station's volunteer coordinator, a tall woman named Ellen, who introduced herself about 20 minutes later, was standing near the entrance with a clipboard. She had the manner of someone who'd been managing large things for a long time and had no particular feelings about it either way. "Are you press?" she asked me. "No," I said. "Tourist." "Sorry." I gestured vaguely at all of it. "Is it true they're coming?" She looked at me with the particular patience of a woman who has answered this question 9 times already this morning. "The Prince and Princess of Wales," she said, "are expected at 12:30. She said it the way you'd confirm a bus timetable. Matter of fact. Like royalty showing up to your workplace was the sort of thing you just arranged around. I found out later she'd been volunteering with the RNLI for 19 years. That tracks. By 11:30, the car park had transformed. Not dramatically, that's what surprised me. There were no crowds 10 deep. No barriers with people pressed against them. It was more like the area had just quietly reorganized itself, the way a tide does, without any single moment where you can point and say that's when it changed. A few more vehicles. A few more people with that particular kind of alert stillness that security personnel carry with them everywhere. Local people had started gathering along the wall by the water's edge. Not a mob of them, maybe 30, 40. Families mostly. A few older couples. A man with a Jack Russell who kept sitting down and refusing to acknowledge that any of this was happening, which honestly seemed like a reasonable position. Declan had by now fully committed to the situation and was standing with his arms crossed trying to look like he hadn't just finished an entire scone. Do you think they'll walk around? Or is it like inside only? I don't know, Declan. Because I read somewhere that William likes to actually talk to people. Properly. Not just the hand thing. The hand thing? You know. He demonstrated a vague regal wave. The thing. A small girl near us, maybe 6 years old, red coat, serious face, turned and looked at him with open judgment. He stopped doing the wave. Then, one of the station crew came out, and he stopped everyone cold without meaning to. Not because of anything dramatic. Just because of what he said. His name was Terry. Retirement age, built like a man who had spent 40 years pulling against the ocean and had simply stopped caring what the ocean thought about it. He'd come outside to smoke a cigarette at the exact edge of what was allowed, and he ended up standing near the small gathered crowd because there was nowhere else to stand. Someone asked him, an older man, local accent, how long he'd been with the RNLI. Terry took a long pull on his cigarette. 31 years, he said. Just that. Someone else asked him how many rescues. He thought about it. Not for drama, genuinely thinking, the way you do when you're trying to count a number that isn't clean. Couple hundred, give or take. Lost count of the exact number around year 8. The small crowd had gone quiet. Anyone, the man who'd asked hesitated. Anyone not make it? That you went for? Terry looked at the water. The harbor was doing its gray November thing, restless, indifferent. 3, he said. Over 31 years. 3 we couldn't bring back. He didn't say anything else about it. He finished his cigarette and went back inside. The crowd stayed quiet for a beat after he left. Nobody performed it. It just happened. The way silence sometimes settles over a place because the weight of a thing lands on everyone at the same time. The little girl in the red coat was watching the harbor. Declan was the one who said what I was thinking. 31 years, he said, quietly. Volunteer. Right. Volunteer. That was the thing. The RNLI has been running on volunteers since 1824. They go into water that is actively trying to kill people, in weather that is actively trying to kill people, in boats that are magnificent but are still just boats, and they do it without a salary, and they do it because what? Because someone has to. Because the sea doesn't care and they do. I kept thinking about that word. 3. 3 people, in 31 years, that Terry couldn't get to in time. And he's still going back. Every time. That's not duty in the way people use the word when they mean obligation. That's duty in the older sense. The one that costs something. At 12:20, a convoy turned into the car park. There was no fanfare. No announcement. Just vehicles, and then, among the figures stepping out, a man and a woman who you recognized before your brain had fully processed why. William was in a dark coat, no tie, and he walked with that particular quality that you don't see very often in public life anymore, unhurried. Not performing unhurriness, not doing the theatricalities thing. Just actually not rushing, looking at the station, at the boats, at the faces of the crew who had come out to meet them. Kate was in Navy. She was laughing at something before she'd even properly arrived, turned to someone beside her, a real laugh, head tilting, the kind you can't manufacture. The station crew were lined up informally. Not military straight. Not rigid. Just there, in their kit, looking like people who do extraordinary things and don't fully believe that today is the day anyone's going to make a fuss about it. William shook hands with the station manager first, and you could see him lean in and actually listen as the man spoke. Not nodding for cameras. Listening. Kate had already moved further down the line and was crouching down in heels on a harbor slipway, which if you've ever been near a harbor slipway you will appreciate takes commitment to talk to a younger crew member who'd clearly not been expecting to be the one she stopped at. He was telling her something. She was nodding, hands clasped in front of her. She said something back and he laughed, startled, like it was funnier than he'd expected. I wished I could hear it. I stayed at the edge of the car park, far enough back to feel like a witness rather than an intrusion. This wasn't my moment. It wasn't even really a public moment, not in the way a walkabout is public. It was something quieter and more specific than that. It felt like a thank you. A real one. There's a version of this story I could tell that would be very tidy. Royals arrive. Royals shake hands. Everyone claps. Royals leave. The end. I've watched that version on newsreels dozens of times and it always feels like footage of something that actually happened somewhere else, some flattened performance version of a real event, all the actual texture scraped off. What I saw wasn't that. They took William through the main station first, the tour, the briefing, the lifeboat itself. A handful of us could see fragments of it through the open doors. The station mechanic, the one who'd been wiping down the hull earlier, was now apparently deep in an explanation of something technical, using his hands, pointing at the engine housing. William was crouched down looking at it. Actually crouched. On the floor of the station. In a reasonably good coat. Declan made a small approving sound. He's doing the thing, he said. What thing? The listening thing. Not fake listening. Real listening. I'd noticed it too. There's a difference and most people can clock it from 20 meters, even without a clear sightline. The body goes different ways. The mechanic, whose name I found out later was Russ, 22 years with the station, was now apparently showing him something specific about the launch mechanism. William asked a question. Russ answered it. William asked a follow-up. This went on for several minutes. At one point one of the accompanying officials made a small move as if to suggest they might need to keep to the schedule, and William made the infinitesimal gesture of a man who has spent his whole life acknowledging schedules while also not being particularly governed by them. They stayed at the engine for another 4 minutes. Kate had ended up outside near the inshore rescue boat with 2 of the female crew members and was laughing again. Not the official soft smile of engagement. The full thing. She'd apparently been told something about a rescue that had involved a swan. I caught the word swan and 4 hours and wouldn't leave the casualty, and honestly I would very much like the full version of that story. The smaller of the 2 crew members was using both hands to demonstrate something. Kate covered her mouth. The harbor was churning behind them, gray-green and bad-tempered, and the orange of the station building was the most vivid color in the landscape, and those 3 women were standing at the edge of the sea laughing about a rescue swan, and there was something so perfectly human about it that it took a moment to process. The girl in the red coat had worked her way to the front of the small crowd and was now watching Kate with the concentrated attention of someone committing a thing to long-term memory. Her mother was watching the girl watch Kate. I was watching all of it and feeling quietly undone about it, the way you do when you've stumbled into a moment that wasn't meant for you but that you'll carry anyway. Then, Terry came back outside. I don't think it was planned. He just came out the side door with a mug of tea and stopped when he saw the crowd and the vehicles and the whole situation, and he was about to turn back when William's security detail, not aggressively, just professionally, sort of paused him in place for a moment as William came around the corner of the building. They ended up face to face. William said something. Terry blinked. Then, answered. They stood there for, I counted, 4 minutes and 20 seconds. I know because I was timing it unconsciously. William didn't look once at anyone else during that 4 minutes and 20 seconds. His eyes were on Terry's face the whole time. At one point Terry looked at the water. William followed his gaze to the water. They stood there looking at the same stretch of harbor for a moment. The harbor that Terry had been launching himself into, when the call came, for 3 decades. I don't know what was said. The wind was wrong and I was far enough back that it would have been intrusive to close the distance. But I saw Terry's face when William shook his hand at the end. Not emotional exactly. Not weepy. Something more interior than that. The expression of a man who has been seen, properly seen, possibly for the first time in a long while, by someone whose seeing of him might carry some small weight in the direction of the world. He went back inside with his tea. His hands were steady. Kate had come around the building with Ellen, the volunteer coordinator, and the two of them had fallen into a conversation that looked nothing like an official engagement and everything like two women who'd found an immediate frequency. Ellen was the kind of person who made no adjustments for anyone. If you were worth talking to, she'd talk to you. If you weren't, she'd be perfectly polite about it and then find somewhere else to be. She'd been doing that all morning with various officials and assistants. She was not doing that now. She was talking to Kate the way she'd talked to someone she'd known for years, pointing out at the water, describing something with her hands. Kate was asking questions. Real ones, the kind where you're building a picture, not performing interest. Ellen said something about night callouts. Kate said something back. Ellen looked at her for a moment. Then, said something else, quieter, that I couldn't catch. Kate nodded. Once, slowly. That exchange, whatever it was, settled differently on Kate's face than the rest of the afternoon had. Something landed in it. Ellen said, "You want to see the call-out room?" Kate said yes. They went inside together. 20 minutes, they were in there. 20 minutes. When they came back out, the whole visit was winding toward its end the way these things do, not abruptly, but with that slow gathering of energy that precedes departure. The crew had assembled informally near the station entrance. A photograph was taken. Not in the rigid, everyone hold still way of official portraits. More like someone had a camera, the group was there, it made sense. People were still mid-conversation. Someone was laughing. The station dog, a battered-looking golden retriever named either Gus or Bus, I got conflicting information, was sitting in the front and nobody had asked him to. William was talking to the young crew member who'd been coiling the rope earlier. Up close, you could see the lad was doing his best not to be visibly delighted about the conversation, with limited success. Kate had crouched down to the girl in the red coat. I hadn't seen that happen. I turned and she was just already there, down to the child's level, and the girl was looking at her with that fierce concentrated expression she'd been wearing all afternoon, and Kate was saying something to her. The girl's mother had both hands over her mouth. The girl reached out and touched Kate's coat. Just briefly. This tiny serious hand. Kate said something. The girl said something back. Kate laughed, surprised again, that real thing. Whatever the girl said, I'll wonder about it for the rest of my life. The formal farewell was brief. Handshakes with the senior crew. A few more words with the station manager. The kind of ending to a visit that you can tell isn't entirely comfortable for anyone involved because the thing itself had been more than a visit and the formalities of departure don't have a setting for that. William stopped at the edge of the slipway and looked out at the water. Just for a second. Maybe less. The kind of pause you don't plan. The sea was the same as it had been all morning, gray, choppy, determined. No more dramatic than before. Not performing itself for the occasion. He turned back. Got in the car. And then, they were gone, and the car park was just a car park again, and the rain had started back up properly, and the station was doing what it always does, existing at the edge of the water, ready. Declan found me standing where the crowd had been. "You all right?" he said. "Yeah," I said. "Yeah, I'm all right." He looked at the station. "Terry," he said. "Terry," I agreed. We stood there for a moment with the rain coming in properly now, the kind that had given up being polite about it. 31 years, Declan said. Volunteer. Yeah. And, then, the future King of England stops and looks at the harbour with him for a minute. I didn't say anything. That's Declan started, and then stopped, because he's not actually a sentimental person and he'd used up his allocation. But I knew what he meant. It was the specificity of it. Not the grandness. Not the ceremony. The small, precise, human act of standing next to someone and looking at the same water they have been looking at for 31 years. Of saying, without saying it, I know. I understand at least the outline of what this has cost you. And, it matters. I spoke to Ellen before we left. She was back to the clipboard, back to the day's administration, the visit already becoming one more thing in the archive of things the station had seen. I asked her what she'd talked about with Kate for 20 minutes. She smiled. Not a big smile. A private one. Mostly about the families, she said. The crew's families. What it's like waiting. She looked at her clipboard. She asked very specific questions, Ellen said. Not the polite questions. The real ones. I asked what the difference was. Polite questions, Ellen said, have answers everyone already knows. Real questions, she paused. Real questions come from wanting to understand something you don't understand yet. She went back inside. The harbour went on doing what it does. I drove back to London the next morning, after a night in the hotel that cost exactly as much as I'd expected and delivered exactly as much as I'd needed. I sat in traffic on the M3 with Declan asleep in the passenger seat and the radio off and that whole grey autumn light pressing on everything. I kept thinking about the three people, in 31 years, that Terry couldn't reach in time. 3 people the water kept. And the 200 others that he did reach. That he dragged back from the thing the sea was planning for them. I kept thinking about the rope. The young crew member coiling it with that focused quiet concentration. The knowledge carried in his hands, his training, his body, that the quality of that coil might one day be the difference between a version of a story with an ending and a version without. I kept thinking about Ellen, clipboard in hand, 19 years deep into her volunteering, talking to a princess about what it means to wait at home and wonder if the person you love is coming back from the water. And I kept thinking about that moment William, Terry, the harbour. 2 men looking at the same grey stretch of sea. The one who goes in when the pager sounds. The one who will one day wear the crown. Both of them knowing, for that one moment, exactly what it means. The RNLI has been saving lives at sea since 1824. They've launched their boats over 145,000 times. Saved over 143,000 lives. Every rescue built on a volunteer who answered the pager. Every pager answered by someone who walked away from whatever they were doing and went. The sea doesn't make exceptions. Neither do they. The lifeboat is always ready. So are the people who crew it. That's the whole story. That's always been the whole story.